Before the premiere of The Day After Tomorrow, 20th Century Fox invited a bunch of scientists to see if their scientist was sort of plausible or stuff like that. The scientists weren't too impressed with the thing, but said it was quote-unquote enjoyable nonsense, which sort of summarize the appeal of this movie to me. But I will mostly say that it is nonsense. It's not as enjoyable as the scientists. They were more forgiving than I was. This is not technically a terrible movie, but let's have a look at to see if we can spot what this movie lacks. This is The Day After Tomorrow. Climate change expert Jack Hall, played by Dennis Quaid, he tries to warn the world that the consequences of climate change might be something different than, what usually scientists are saying, because he predicts that we might have an event that might turn into a new ice age. Exactly when this ice age thing might happen, he doesn't exactly know. It might be in 10 years or 100 years or 1,000 years. But because this is a movie made by Ronald Emmerich, you do know that it is not 100 years it's going to take, maybe 100 seconds. So the event of course happens, and these storms are creating chaos on Earth with, big blizzards in Tokyo and, tornadoes tearing down the Hollywood signs because, disasters in disaster movies always goes after the famous landmarks, yay. And they're creating these kind of ice tornadoes and, that freezes worlds and stuff like that. So now humanity scrambles for what to do in these situations. And of course, because this is a Ronald Emmerich movie, Jack Hall is, of course, a great scientist, but a terrible dad who missed his, son's baseball game, or, insert whatever cliche you want to do. His son, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, is stuck in New York that is about to be frozen to death. So now he must prove he's not only a great scientist but an excellent dad. Oh, and also Ian Holm is sitting in Edinburgh, in a weather station, who is one of the guys who discovers this. He kind of just hangs around there and dies. Spoilers. So now we have a movie going. If you're looking back at the movie years of like 2002 to 2004, there is a severe lack of big movies with big explosions and, great destruction sequences. Hollywood kind of scaled back on it after 9/11, and this was one of the first, if not the first movie to, emphasize on, cities being torn down and big floods and, buildings collapsing and stuff like that. So I was kind of hyped for this one. For that particular reason. I have a soft spot for, buildings collapsing and, big destruction sequences and stuff like that. I went in with glee on my face and I walked out with glum on my face. And I was kind of, that was not very good. So this movie has a bunch of stuff working against itself. One of the major ones is, of course, that it is absolutely covered from head to toe in some of the most ridiculous disaster movie cliches that has ever been invented, and some that they probably invented in this one. Oh my sweet Jesus. The thing that interested me about this movie was not the struggle of Dennis Quaid to save Jake Gyllenhaal in New York. That story could have probably been interesting, but they decided not to do it because they, had to stuff it with as much ridiculous nonsense as you kind of, what? But we'll get to that in a second. I was more fascinated with the consequences for the world. I would have liked to see the post-apocalyptical movie that would have followed this one, because the decisions that the leaders of the world would have to make, and the consequences for mankind that this would lead to, it could have led to an amazing movie. They just kind of decided not to do that movie. And the consequences for humanity after this, if you have seen the alternate history hubs version of what happened next, situations for humanity doesn't look very cheerful, you could say. But this movie features 3 actors I really like. Dennis Quaid makes almost every movie he's in much better. Jake Gyllenhaal is a bit of a hit and miss, but when he really hits, a big, good role, then we're on a roll. And Ian Holm is good in basically everything he's in. So this had a lot of things working for itself, but they just had to drown it in so much cliches, because I didn't care about Jake Gyllenhaal in New York, and I didn't care about, father and son reuniting, and that would mean something, because it doesn't mean anything in this movie, because this movie is about the fate of humanity. Take a movie, for instance, Greenland, that came out 2020. Greenland was a very good movie. Maybe because it's focused more on a small group of people, and we're seeing the disaster happening, from their point of view, rather than we're jumping around and we're trying to shoehorn in Jake Gyllenhaal and Dennis Quaid's, reuniting as father and son being this kind of big thing. I don't know really why it doesn't work here in Greenland, because I really liked Greenland, and I really recommend this one if you want to see a really good disaster movie that's come out in recent years. Maybe it is because the special effects has aged pretty terrible. I mean, when I saw the movie in 2004, I was kind of unimpressed by the destruction sequences and the special effects. I thought they looked to be on par with, say, a movie like Deep Impact, one of the most terrible big budget disaster movies of all time. I'm probably gonna have to do the review of that one at some point, and oh boy, that's not gonna be a fun time. But 17 years later, the sequences has aged rather woefully, so we don't really have that going on for itself, and all the cliches are just maddening. This movie, unlike 2012 for instance, doesn't suffer the bullets to the head that was the ending of that movie. This movie kind of just phases out, but there is one all-time marvelously dumb sequence in this movie. It might be the dumbest sequence of 2004. It might be the dumbest sequence of the entire 2000s. I don't know. Wait a minute. Twilight came out in the 2000s. One of the dumbest sequences I have ever seen in my entire life. It is the sequence when the blizzard hits New York and they have to run away from the cold. They literally have to run away from the cold as if it was a monster. And because they shut the door on cold, cold can't get in. So they don't freeze to death. Have I got that right? There is probably some small little loophole somewhere that would explain this movie, but I'm going to just say that it was very polite of cold not to squeeze in through the keyhole and eat them up or something like that. And of course, how can people get frozen absolutely stiff and die, but the wolves can survive? And we don't even have Liam Neeson here to punch them with liquor bottles and stuff like that, which didn't happen in the great Damn You Grey. In the end, I would say that The Day After Tomorrow is an okay movie. There are moments in this movie that looks kind of awesome, and there are sequences that I think is really fascinating, but the majority of the story is just classic Ronald Emmerich cliches that I don't really like. I like more when he does big action pieces like The Patriot or Independence Day or Stargate. But this movie doesn't have the spectacular scope to make this movie feel like a worldwide event, sort of like 2012. And it doesn't have the small focus on just a small group of people like Greenland had. So it's kind of in the middle, and it's also kind of in the middle when it comes to disaster movies. It isn't terrible, like Deep Impact, but it isn't good, like, let's say, Greenland, as I mentioned before. But it doesn't suffer the blow that 2012 did when it went absolutely what the fuck is going on here in the end. It is not a bad movie, but the acting is kind of hokey, and the script is kind of cheesy, and the cliches are just too many. This movie gets 43 points. It is an okay big budget blockbuster disaster flick, and it has good actors who are unable or unwilling to do something better than okay, and it has a very cliche-ridden script, and there are, you know, moments in this movie that is kind of enjoyable, but there is nothing here that really sticks out. The only thing that really sticks out is the kind of stupid stuff that you kind of see and goes, huh, that was dumb. Before we go, I'm just gonna say the thing that people probably have forgotten today, but before this movie premiered, the thing that drew its most attention for was not the, you know, story about climate change, not the story about that finally Hollywood was gonna go back to blow shit up and destroy cities. It was the fact that the vice president of this movie was very, you know, supposed to be a bit like Dick Cheney, that was the vice president at the time, and it drew a lot of criticism from the Bush administrations from, you know, portraying their you know, vice president as a climate change sort of denier. It didn't, you know, say that that climate change didn't exist. It just said that we cannot change our economy just because you say so and so, and that was kind of, huh. They were pissed about that. Personally, I don't know if it was so close to Dick Cheney, but I don't know. Maybe my memory of Dick Cheney as vice president is a little sketchy, but I don't know. It didn't bother me that much. I'll see you next time anyway from so-and-so reviewing well, such and such. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.